Jacksonville. The child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks and their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history of this land of flowers.
The April 19th edition of The Weekend was on WBRN Radio and via the Boston Red Network. Nonetheless, we roll on here. This week is a kind of, let's see, a gateway perhaps to more of a summer months coming up here, at least here in the U.S., is a holiday called Memorial Day. We usually have a special presentation, the history of Memorial Day, how it came about as a celebration of the Union victory by African American soldiers. So we'll talk about that once more on that special programming that will come up. In the news today, of course, the wedding in the UK, I won't say in London, it's about, 20-something kilometers outside of London in Royals land. It was once said by someone, I don't recall now, about the Royals, as one would know the Royals in Britain is an elite institution that progressives, socialists, and communists have long wanted to abolish. But back to the quote, when there was a serious time there of getting rid of the Windsors, there was a talk of that, and according to this Brit, the Americans would not let us do it. So they're playing up the Royals' wedding there, an American actress, an African American at that, marrying Prince Henry, the Harry. Anyway, the son of Diana. Diana, of course, was killed in the 90s. A very tragic event. Some would obviously use the word murdered, and she was in fact murdered. They have talked about that and what happened to Diana and how the car hit her motorcade. Very unfortunate situation. These were young boys at the time. Now they have turned into men and have children of their own. So turning a tragic tale of their mother into something with somewhat of a look of progress, in the sense that the royal family has always been very good at their PR. So now they went back to an old tape spotlighting interracials in the royal families, but the royal family has been interracial for a very, very a long time. First of all, their kinship to other quote-unquote royals across Europe who were themselves entwined with Africans along the way. In fact, Dinah herself was referring to, at the time, General Colin Powell as cousin Colin. And one remarked, had he been in the UK and not in the American system, he had been, of course, the security advisor to Ronald Reagan. And later, General Powell became the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He rose through the ranks, and the remark was by this Brit that had he been in Britain because of the racist system there, he would have probably been a porter or some functionary down the trodden road, no doubt about it. And that is one of the things that has not happened in the UK. There are very, very few Africans in the Parliament in the UK, nor appear as prominent presenters, they call them, whether it be at the BBC or BBC radio. Now, the radio is a little bit different because they do have presenters from around the world. They've always tried to keep up the multicultural aspect of BBC radio. But the right-wing influence on BBC radio and BBC One, etc., has been tremendous in how the programming is, and of course, letting in of commercials and other sorts of things. It's an unfortunate situation to a most venerable institution. And as many people know, on our companion program, A Numbers Man is the macroeconomic program, we had been using the market statistics from the BBC. And they went to a new format, and some of the markets and some of the commodities were cut out of the streamline, more made for TV type of setup. We understand things change with the time, but the information should remain the information. And that in itself is very unfortunate. So now we've had to piece things together from Bloomberg and from various others. And as we go along, we'll get it better and get it on the teleprompter. We used to use the teleprompter regularly, and we don't use it as much now. We'll go back to that format, specifically for certain statistical references that we make when we are looking at studies, etc. We don't necessarily need to use the teleprompter. Enough of this. Let's go to the Washington Post. A little bit of intrigue here, but basically standard type of intelligence agency logo. In mid-2016, a retired American professor approached an advisor to DJ Trump's campaign at a symposium about the White House race held at a British university. This is usually always the case. Now, many times, as opposed to a retired academic or even an academic, an active academic that is on the CIA/FBI intelligence agency payroll, you used to see, as we did in the Baghdad War. I remember telling Julie at the time, we were in San Francisco, it was explained to her that a computer sales type arrived in Baghdad before the bombs started dropping, quite literally. But that used to be the prelude. Computer type sales type would arrive in a country, and of course the person would be heavily embedded in the intelligence services. And this is the same thing we understand in the U.S. The part that academia has played in, particularly in the CIA. I remember at university, had a number of professors that had came out of the predecessor of the CIA. during the Great War. A little different situation there. But some of those people remained in the quote-unquote the CIA, and they taught classes throughout the world and at leading universities in America and abroad. So it's nothing new right there, having these informants in academia. What is a little bit different here is the approach. This Carter Page character being at a symposium, and this is a connection we've been trying to make to some out there that we did a program, the Eggheads, and we recently did another program about where academics stand with the Trump people. There has been this feeling amongst certain segments of the population that academics were just eggheads and their studies were just their studies. But what we have new now is this whole idea of alternative facts. In other words, if you take the facts out of a privy, and I'm being charitable here, outhouse, and put it up smelling like a rose on Fifth Avenue, it's not the same thing. So these people that have been taught, I remember talking to a woman who was talking about a neighbor that encouraged, and all of his kids went to college and got college-type jobs. And whereas she was thinking that education itself was basically useless. Well, it would depend on how you approach that from an academic situation, if it is actually an academic situation. You notice we did not say a purely academic situation, because the universities in the U.S. in particular have become less academic and more business-oriented. Stadiums and what have you are named after major corporations. Major corporations give chairs at universities, which used to be, say, the Einstein chair, is now the Goldman Sachs chair, etc. It has totally changed the university environment. But that set this whole idea of symposiums with the conservatives. The conservatives have their think tanks. We come to mine here, the Heritage Foundation. They publish so-called papers, gathering of statistics, etc., and various other foundations too numerous to name. The Libertarians have their organization and various others. The liberals have their think tanks out there to conduct research and present papers and have fellows there. The Brookings is one that I think of, and the Brookings does do some work that we could say is progressive, but in the field of foreign policy, it's reactionary. No doubt some of the people working around those types of places would be the same that would be over at the Heritage Foundation, because foreign policy in the U.S., and if you include actors such as Hillary the Monster Clinton, has been a reactionary. And the same is under DJ Trump. That has not changed. This whole pursuing of the Korean Peninsula. And incidentally, that is some complications there. Will a summit be held in, I think, June the 12th in Singapore? We don't know about that. And this whole thing about a Nobel Prize for DJ Trump. The governor of Kansas has come out supporting that. He's running against this nutcase Kobat, who is the Secretary of State there in Kansas. But one of the things has happened in Kansas that since Brombeck and company bankrupted the state on this low tax situation, and they've had to raise taxes to get a revenue in, and this all revolves around public education and various other facts. So this is kind of interrelated, but back to the local CIA thing. DJ Trump on Twitter said that perhaps they had moles in his campaign. Well, we don't know about that, But that would not be unusual that a mole would appear in any campaign. The role played by the source at the center of the battle had pitted Trump's against his own Justice Department, fueled the president's attack on the special prosecutor here. He called the probe a disgusting, illegal, and unwarranted witch hunt. Not much of a witch hunt, it is, as they say. They got some people in the brew, so to speak, there. The Post, after speaking with people familiar with the role, and the Post has always played this role going back to Watergate, way before the Amazon baron took over the Post, confirmed the identity of the source. And this is kind of scary here, that these people are that familiar with the workings of the intelligence community, but not reporting the name. Don't worry, the name will be out soon. This is the age of social media. This Carter Page is one of 3 Trump advisors whom the FBI informant contacted in the summer and in the fall of 2016. And it was centered on a foreign policy or lack thereof. There had been speculation that he might have tried to reel me in, Page had said. So Page knew he was. Another character, co-chair from Iowa named Sam Clovis. He would talk with this fellow at over a coffee, and he reached out to George Papadopoulos, an unpaid foreign policy advisor. So he's reaching out to all these characters here and the interrelationships between them. For years, the professor had provided information to both the FBI and CIA, according to people familiar. He added the Russian investigation before and after Mr. Mueller appeared. Exactly when the professor began work on the case is unknown. Well, probably from day one. He probably moved from another case. The conference was held after Page traveled to Russia, where he delivered a speech at the new economic school that publicly criticized American foreign policy. But Page is gone now, so we don't have to worry about Page. Page and the FBI informant stayed in touch after the conference, meeting several times around the Washington, D.C. area, no doubt. And basically the same thing here, this inexperienced foreign policy advisor, Papadopoulos, had been on the FBI's radar also. But this is not unusual here. For these people to feel people out. Page accepted while in London, met for drinks with a woman who identified herself as the professor's assistant. She was probably a CIA type. They use this at the Travelers Club, a 200-year-old private club, but a lot of diplomats hang around and a lot of agents hang around. And he also had Papadopoulos, I think, to write a paper for $3,000. That was just to get into Papadopoulos' way of thinking. Have these all the time, and in social media, it's not unusual for someone to reach out to a person. We've had this happen to us. Not this type of scenario, but just scenarios to find out what our thinking was about. And what we were thinking about, I should say. But what we were thinking about, you're hearing it right now. So a little bit different situation there than these so-called foreign policy advisors and people in the Trump administration. But I would venture to say they also took a look at various people around the Clinton inner circle. The difference there is that most of these characters around Clinton had been connected with the CIA and the intelligence community. So in other words, they had already been vented. They did not need to vent them twice. But this whole thing is sort of interwound between intelligence services, commercial operations, and the whole 9 yards. And you're seeing this play. You have the business interests, that is, as President Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex. They're all basically together. It's about selling munitions, tanks, and basically where the money is going. That's why they whipped up hysteria on the moving of the capital from Tel Aviv, which most people in the world, civilized world, recognize as the capital of the Zionist state, to Jerusalem, which is a religious meeting, so forth, of three very large religious groups. But we have to understand that some are not there, not the Hindus. But you have the Christians and Muslims and the Jews all having their religious symbols in the cabinet, so to speak. But the whole idea of whipping this up and the Egyptians entering in there and warning Hamas about how to tread and how not to tread there on the in Gaza, where they are. But the whole East Bank thing, and of course the president of Egypt, the little character, Susi, is tied in with military contractors in Egypt. And so in other words, you have the same kind of game, and then you have all these intelligence services. The Hamas was, of course, created by the Mossad as a counterbalance, and this is what people have to understand, too, of the PLO, which is a secular organization. And some of these machinations, you have to catch the subtleties of them. But in this particular situation, yes, you could think that the Trump administration be caught up because Trump had already had business interests in the Russian Federation and also in places like Ukraine, etc., and involvement with oligarchs. So in other words, this was a pre-written script for them to be around, discount less of trying to influence his campaign. But when you have that many spooks sitting in the waiting room, so to speak, all kinds of things are happening at the same time. Enough of this. Let's move on here to the Postal Service while we're at the, well, actually this is Reuters. DJ Trump is wanting the Postal Service, which is an independent corporation, to double the rates for Amazon and for a few others. Well, it won't happen. Bezos and company, who is, of course, at the Post, and Trump are running a battle there with them. But Amazon and these various characters, they set up these non-compete contracts that are secret. So we don't really know what they pay, but it has provided substantial revenue to the Postal Service that the Postal Service would not have. We're assuming if DJ Trump is around the next time the contracts come up, they would be looked at in a much more serious manner. But that would be one thing for Congress to do. And of course, DJ Trump's party controls Congress, so this is really not a serious effort. Trump himself, but just the sheer pressure there, it puts some pressure on Amazon and others. Now, one has to understand that the Postal Service, for more than 2 decades, have struck a business-friendly relationship long before Amazon came along. Bulk mail and those sort of things, those sweetheart deals that they fill up mailboxes. Of course, filling up mailboxes is not now. We have spam with emails. But the whole point is this, that some of this traffic still exists out there. Many of us that are on the web and have electronic sources get very few, quote-unquote, old-school letters or communications. Comcast is one of the big offenders of that. They're always sending something out. We see them, and that's really very, very few. Occasionally a technology company will send something along, but generally speaking, that's not much of it. So much for the Postal Service. Incidentally, we've done at least 2 shows on the Postal Service, and recommend that you check those out. And we've always supported the U.S. Postal Service and postal workers, period. Down in Missouri, the machinations are still going on with Gittens there, who is the governor there, assembling a committee to try to decide whether they're going to impeach him or not. And in Cole County, that's some county in Missouri, they were pursuing a criminal case that was recommended by the Attorney General against Gittens because evidently he had an ex-charity donors list, something involved there. Holly, the Attorney General, had been probing that fund and had recommended that this prosecutor named Richardson take it on. Richardson had declined. This is from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And now old Richardson's announced that he decided not to file a criminal charge, which is in his prerogative. Prosecuting attorneys, of course, have a discretion, but this office stands by its determination. This is the Attorney General's office here. This is from Mary Compton. That a crime had been committed. Now this Richardson White works for a state representative named Bill White. He's a Joplin Republican who supports Gittens. Interesting there. In late April, White's wife, she's a Dr. Margaret L. Nichols, received an appointment from Gittens to the State Board of Registration for Healing Arts. Sorry about that. So it's a little job there. So in other words, a shell game there, but old Richardson said he just didn't have time to deal with it, was his comment. But he did have time at one time, this Richardson character, to vigorously prosecute a group of elderly African-American pastors for singing hymns he didn't like in the state Senate. So he announced he can't be bothered with these accusations against the governor. And incidentally, the faith leaders here were campaigning for Medicaid expansion. Now, this was in 2016, April 15th. They were there. The protests were calling for Medicaid expansion in Missouri. And basically, Missouri and Jobs with Justice, expansion of the Affordable Care Act under Barack Obama. That involves, and we've talked about Medicaid, up to 138% of the poverty level. That's $16,000 for an individual, $33,000 for a family of four. That was as of 2015. Now, many states, including Republican states, have expanded their Medicare in their states. And again, from various pastors, one of the protesters, this is Emmett Baker, the Right Reverend Dr. Emmett Baker, said at the time that applicants had exhausted other options to reach out to legislatures. We need to do something to aid our congregations, he said after the protest. So nonetheless, I believe the charges probably were dismissed. They asked for dismissal. Let's go to Uncle Carl Rove. I usually see him, but anyway, he's writing in the Wall Street Journal, as usual, on the 17th of May. North Korea, as he calls it, Iran, and Iraq. Oh my. The world doesn't postpone challenges so that policymakers will have time to prepare. Mike Papillon was sworn in as Secretary of State 3 weeks ago. John Right-Wing Bolton walked into the West Wing as National Security Advisor 2.5 weeks ago, along with DJ Trump. The two newcomers are facing huge so-called foreign policy challenges, coming like a runaway freight train. On the we usually talked about this. They will supposedly DJ Trump will meet in Singapore between he and Little Rocket Man, that is Field Marshal is not some moronic playboy, although in his 20s, when he became the supreme leader, that was 2011, he quickly consolidated power. He's also crafty. Well, a lot of crafty people around here, angered by military exercises between the South and the North. the South and the U.S. He decided Thursday to cancel coming meetings with the president of the Republic of Korea. He also threatened to call off the summit unilaterally. The leader is throwing a prepared hissy fit, testing American and South Korean leaders to see how they will respond. Both governments should ignore his antics. Trump cannot appear to want the summit more than Kim, but in reality he does. The North Korean, and the Robe calls him a dictator, agreed to attend only because his economy has tanked after years of international sanctions. His saber rattling has caused Japan and Korea to strengthen their militaries and draw closer to the U.S. The Chinese, whom wish Kim has too often ignored, also pressured him to the table. Well, in actuality, Uncle Carl is misstated here. The economy in the Democratic Republic of Korea has actually grown in the last few years. Field Marshal Kim has been building high-rises. He has been opening factories to produce all kinds of products for his people and to sell worldwide. Nonetheless, so Uncle Carl equates this as this messiness shows the talk of a Nobel Prize for DJ Trump is wildly premature. The negotiations will be complicated and difficult, and there's no certain outcome there. Field Marshal Kim means by denouncing denuclearization, might be entirely different from what Trump says. Well, that will be defined. We don't have to worry about that. He goes back to his father and grandfather made pledges to end or disable the nuclear campaign. Well, part of the problem here is the nuclear campaign, the reason that they have it, is because of the threats by the U.S. and various militaristic operators like Japan in their region. David Kaye, they brought David Kaye in, former U.S. United Nations weapons inspector, has pointed out it would be extremely difficult to verify if Democratic Republic of Korea has ended its program and turned over its fossil material and destroyed the warheads in compliance with the agreement. As Trump, Papillon, and Bolton arrive in Singapore, they'd better have a plan. Well, they have some kind of plan to get a Nobel Peace Prize. Present a unified front, insisting on concrete goals, etc. The second big foreign policy challenge is Iran. The president withdrew, DJ Trump withdrew from the accord signed by the Europeans, China, and the Russian Federation, that being France, the UK, and Germany. So that is a no-brainer. The Europeans are trying to keep their end of the bargain up, involving Theresa May, Chancellor Merkel, to agree to anytime, any place inspections to end the enrichment there, and a deal to stop its missile program. But you have to ask the question, Iran, the Islamic Republic, why it cannot have a nuclear program. The Zionists have nuclear weapons, and no one has said that they have to give up the nuclear weapons. The problem is that this whole escapade is based upon the racist Wilsonian foreign policy, a Sambo policy. And in 2018, it's just not going to work. So therefore, the so-called nuclear race in the Mideast will continue on. If they scrap the deal, the Iranians will continue to be there. They have been there since the 70s. These so-called sanctions have been there. The only thing the U.S. will get out of it is an increase in the price of petrol. And we've been looking at that. It's about $85 a barrel the last time we looked. We have more of that on Numbers Man on many of these same channels. Let me move on here. Have a bigoted judge down in Dallas. Nothing new there. He wrote one of the old covenants. Hadn't heard that out, but they used to write those covenants where he cut his kids out of Vickers Cunningham out of his estate if they married someone that would have been a European or someone that would have been was Christian and straight. His estranged brother, who happened to be gay, evidently dropped the dime on old Cunningham. Cunningham first denied it, then he said, I quote, I strongly support traditional family values. Cunningham said, if you marry a person of the opposite sex that is Caucasian, that's Christian, they will get a distribution. Well, that's what he said. It was in 2010, 8 years ago, that he said that. And his son evidently was married to a Vietnamese person, a quote-unquote an Asian there, and I suppose when he cut his son out. But his type of old line thinking, he's running for the county board. Majority of the voters there are African Americans and Latinos. And he evidently, Bill Cunningham is the brother there who is in a relationship with an African American. Said he referred to him as boy. I don't doubt that. A picture of him there. And the whole story of the family. And then someone, Amanda Tackett, a former magazine writer for the Dallas Morning News, confirmed much of the story. She heard the former judge repeatedly use the N-word, no doubt about that. And she described criminal cases involving African Americans as a TND. I'd not heard of this one, short for typical N-word deals. Well, no doubt. I've never met another European person like this, Tackett said. He's a character out of the movie. Well, no, he's a character out of 2008 reality. Period. So nonetheless, his brother Bill had moved back to Dallas from California when it all started. And his amicus continues. Not unusual there. Even involved the mother, who is 81, said her son is not a racist. But I can only assume it's because Vic would not loan Bill $45,000 of my money to help pay his mortgage. I don't know about that one. So a family thing has turned into some evidence here that old Cunningham is a bigot from what he's written. He's the runoff election for District 2, which covers North Dallas County, is Tuesday, so it's coming up. The winner of the Republican nomination will face a Democrat in November. Let me just make sure that I've got the date here right of this article. Yeah. It's recent. The Washington Post had it also up here, so I'm assuming that it is a recent article. I guess I didn't keep the Post article here. Some of these newspapers are notorious about not dating what they have in as articles, and it's kind of disconcerting to us because we need to keep a running situation so we can have some kind of timeline when these things occur. So we assume it would be on Tuesday. It was either on a Tuesday or a Tuesday coming up. Here we more shenanigans here. State lawmaker suit lands 5 days before his multi-million-dollar runoff to decide the Republican nomination candidate to a race to replace this is Representative Hesslinger of Dallas. I guess he's not running anymore. Period here. And let me just see if I can get a date on this one, if I'm lucky. Probably not lucky. Not certain why they don't date their articles. And it doesn't put us in a position where, whoops. Anyway, this bird had been a big figure there. This is the Dallas News. Okay, well, 12 hours ago. So this is recent. We finally found the answer. On to ESPN. The game later today on the 19th. The Celtics will be in Cleveland playing the Cavaliers. Let's get to one hockey game that was played. This will be the Winnipeg Jets and the Golden Knights of Las Vegas. 3-2 Golden Knights of Las Vegas. They in their series, 3 Western Finals, 3-1 is the score there. On to Major League Baseball. I apologize for forgetting to give the scores last night on Friday Job. But nonetheless, the Padres were at the Pirates in Pittsburgh. Padres 3-2. The Athletics were in Toronto. Athletics 3-1. The Orioles were in Boston. Orioles 7-4. They started playing some in Fenway Park. The Cubs were in a Cincinnati game that we tuned into. And the final score was 8 for the Cubs and 1 for the Reds. Cubs had 15 hits. Reds had 2. And I think this is wrong. There were at least 3 errors there. They only have 1. But anyway, the D-backs and Mets 3-1. The Marlins and Atlanta. Marlins shut Atlanta out in Atlanta. The Rangers and White Sox on the south side of Chicago. Sox don't have a very good team this year. Rangers 12-5. The Brewers and Twins in Minnesota. Brewers 8-3. Cleveland and the Astros in Houston. Astros 4-1. They're back to the winning ways. The Yankees were in Kansas City, and Kansas City pulled it out 5-2. Like their old days, that loser was C.C. Sabathani. Nonetheless, the Phillies and Cards in St. Louis. Cards 12-4. Cards had 15 hits, no errors. And I was thinking of the Phillies game. Apologize for that. The Phillies were the one had 7 hits and 3 errors. You listen to several games, you can get confused. Anyway, the Rays and Angels. Rays 8-3. The Tigers and the Mariners out in Seattle. Mariners 5-4. Actually, the Tigers, I believe, were ahead in that game. I don't have the line score here, but the Tigers had 7 hits, no errors, and the Mariners had 5 hits and 2 errors and still ended up winning the game. The Rockies and Giants in San Francisco. Giants have been devastated. Mr. Holland lost the game, and the Rockies 6-1 score there. And finally, rained out with the Dodgers and Nationals. They will have a double hitter tomorrow. This will do it for us. We'll see you on Numbers Man. That is our macroeconomic production. And we'll be talking about the latest figures involving, of course, the government there. And hopefully we'll get an open source report in. We're doing a little traveling this weekend, but we'll attempt to get around to it. Good day and have a good weekend, everyone.